Well, in just a few weeks, a new 6-part series of Picnic at Hanging Rock will release on Australian TV. Yes, we've had the book, we've had the movie, and now it's time for a 6-part TV episode series thing that's going to happen all across screens all over Australia. The first 2 episodes had their premiere at the Berlin Film Festival last month, and the press were invited to The Rock recently in Australia for the launch. The Hub's Claire Nichols went along to take a look.
I'm taking a tour of the Hanging Rock Reserve, just about an hour's north of Melbourne.
Mammalian, volcanic. Coming out through a vent, the lava's been pushed up through a vent. This rock is very high in Soda. It's a trachyte.
Our guide is really helpful. He's describing the history of this really beautiful place, its geological foundations. But honestly, in my head, this is all I can hear.
We get a fair bit of people running around screaming Miranda. There's voices coming from all different parts of the rock on most days, yes.
It's only been 50 years since Joan Lindsay published Picnic at Hanging Rock, so in a way it's almost surprising how deeply this story has become rooted in the Australian consciousness. For me, I've never been to this place before, but after reading the book, seeing the movie, even seeing a play, I do feel like I already know this place. And that breeze you hear right now, everything feels slightly sinister and scary. Those stories that we've heard about, stopped watches, women vanishing. When you hear it, it does almost seem like it could come true.
Hello, my name is Jo Porter and I am the executive producer of Picnic at Hanging Rock.
Jo, we're here in the area, in where this story happens. I wanted to ask, this myth that pervades about Hanging Rock, why do you think it's so deeply entrenched in our psyche?
I think for Australians, the otherness of the bush and just the magnitude of our landscape in which we exist, you know that it is possible to just disappear and to vanish, and that's not always the case anywhere else.
It's some sort of colonial type fear, right?
Probably. I mean, I think it's significant that the novel is set at the turn of the century, just before Federation, as we're sort of throwing off the shackles of the past to become our own nation and determine our own identity. And indeed, I think one of the big themes throughout the book and what we're exploring in the television adaptation of the novel is identity and the ability to be self-determined in where you want your life to go, rather than the stitches that society and the rules have put upon you.
I do find it really interesting, Jo, that it's this myth, this story, which is not a true story about these women vanishing, that prevails at Hanging Rock. Hanging Rock has its own history, a very significant Indigenous history as well. Why do you think it's this particular story that we want to believe in?
I think because it's unanswered. And so I think for people, you can project your own experience of nature and your own fears onto that mythology. And so it does capture the imagination in that regard.
So, Jo, this has been a novel and an iconic film. Why did you think we needed to explore this story again in 2018? Look,
the adaptation for film was done in the 70s. And so, some 40 years later, it seems it's time to sort of go back and re-examine that source material through a contemporary lens of today, look at the roles of women, and it feels that there was something really fresh and more that you could explore, and also in a 6 hours that you had more scope to explore.
Happy St. Valentine's Day!
Happy St. Valentine's Day.
I was really interested watching the first episode of this in your interpretation of the female characters. How much focus was there on carving out individual stories for each of the women in this show?
Well, look, really, again, the book was the source. So we went back to the book, and Joan Lindsay has left behind all these tantalising little clues that I call them like almost strings that if you tug out tumbles all this incredible possibility of story and backstory to explore. And so the Miranda of the novel is a very earthed girl. She comes from far north Queensland. She lives on a farm. She's great with horses. And so she isn't this sort of ephemeral creature. She's actually of the earth. And it helped define the different girls, actually, as you went back to the source material. And for us, really give them a life and a reason for why they were in this particular circumstance and made these choices.
And you've talked about this series having a female gaze. It's that kind of term, female gaze. It's a hard thing to define. Can you give me an example of how you think you've exerted a female gaze? What can we see in this TV series that shows that?
It's subtle choices in, be it from, frankly, costuming, from the art design, through to the direction, the way we've cut scenes, the choices, the weighting of the gaze of the audience, which is what you do in television and filmmaking, has been, because we're women, we can't help but weight the gaze that way. And I think it allows you to sort of explore certain things, maybe not be so interested in others, and really lean into the women in the show, and rather than them being ciphers that make them very active.
And one of the women you've really focused on in your adaptation is the headmistress. In the book, we know that it's suggested that maybe she doesn't have a teaching degree. Maybe this school isn't quite what it seems, but it's not made explicit what's going on. Right from the start of this series, you make it explicit that she is somebody else. She's claiming to be someone she's not. Why make that choice?
I think it becomes totally watch this space. What is she going to get away with, But I think that was also true of the time. It was, people came to Australia to start again, white migrants. So to sort of, who am I going to be? Start again, the bottom of the world. No one, leave your past behind and really reinvent yourself. And again, there's all those clues sitting in Joan's book that we've sort of really latched onto.
Right. Now, Peter Weir's film is so iconic. When people talk about great Australian films, this comes up. How daunting a prospect to take a piece from the canon like that and try to reinvent it.
Yes, but no, because his film is remarkable, and it's its own piece, and it sits so, as you say, proudly in the Australian canon of great cinema. However, we didn't remake his film. We went back to the novel, and so I think that gives you great freedom. Classic text is adapted again and again and again, so why not this book? And so we were aware of it, and obviously you're cognizant of the weight that, because the novel is so important, as is the film. But, we love the book too. And so as fans of the novel and wanting to do the right thing by Joan Lindsay's story, we really just relied on that as being our compass in the choices that we made.
Do you use Peter Weir's film as, we can't do that, we can't have panpipe music, Do you have any rules to separate yourself from that film?
The only rule was actually the composition. It was because it was so iconic for the film that, we'd obviously wanted to stay away from that. But, when I was starting to think about, okay, visually, what's it going to look like? Again, so many of the references that he took were also from the novel itself. So the costuming on the day of the Valentines, many of those sort of iconic moments that people may remember from the film are, not surprisingly, from the novel itself.
Jo, we've been to Hanging Rock today, and there are people that will walk that trail at Hanging Rock, and they truly believe that girls went missing there. They believe that this story is true. We've got a new series coming out, which is only going to further that belief. Is that a good thing?
I love that people want to disappear into the world, the magic of a story. I think there's something wonderful about all of us being enraptured into the possibility of an idea. And so I hope so. I love that idea that we're prepared to allow our imaginations to take us somewhere. It was funny when we were filming there, and we had, as you say, there's people who almost make a pilgrimage to Hanging Rock. And yet while we were shooting there was girls in literally white dresses running around. We had Edith running, screaming out of the bush. And you're seeing these tourists going, what? What the? It was very funny when we were seeing that happen.
Miranda, don't go up there! Come back!
The executive producer of Picnic at Hanging Rock, Jo Porter, speaking to the Hub's Claire Nichols. You also heard from Mark Brindley, a ranger at the Rock. The show releases in 6 parts on Foxtel on the 6th of May.